Normandy, France. August 9th, 1944. A German general stares at his battle map, counting his forces, 900 tanks. Elite Panzer divisions. Tiger tanks that can obliterate 5 enemy Shermans before going down. He thinks he's winning. He has no idea. The war is already over, and the reason why will shock you. General Heinrich Eberbach stood in a French castle near Falaise, studying the map laid out before him. Artillery boomed somewhere in the distance, but inside this room everything was calm and calculated. Eberbach was a tank expert who believed in cold, hard facts over emotion. And those facts looked pretty good to him right now. He commanded what remained of Germany's most legendary armored units, the 1st SS Panzer Division, the 12th SS, the Panzerlehr, his forces, about 900 working tanks and assault guns spread across the region. Among them were the Tiger's massive 60-ton beasts that could take out an American Sherman from over a mile away. Eberbach knew the statistics by heart. He needed 5 Shermans just to take down a single Tiger, so, in his mind, if he positioned his heavy armor correctly in those French hedgerows, he could drain the Americans completely. He thought this was just another tactical engagement. He figured that as long as his tank crews aimed well and his Tigers controlled the key intersections, he could hold the defensive line steady. But he was completely mistaken. What Eberbach did, and realized what he could impossibly see from his command post, was that this battle had already been won weeks earlier, and it wasn't won by combat soldiers. It was won by factory workers in Detroit and supply officers managing the ports. While Eberbach treated his 900 tanks like irreplaceable treasures he'd need for months ahead, the Americans viewed their tanks as throwaway equipment. Right at that moment, just 50 miles west, a truck convoy was rolling out from the beach. It wasn't hauling bullets or shells. It was packed with hundreds of spare engine blocks. Eberbach was playing chess with carefully crafted pieces. His opponent was playing a completely different game, one where the pieces just kept respawning infinitely. The general was about to learn a brutal lesson. Bravery means absolutely nothing when your enemy has bottomless reserves of steel. To really grasp what nightmare General Eberbach was facing, we need to understand German tank logistics in 1944. It was basically a patchwork system held together with duct tape and prayer. By August, the once powerful German army was literally scavenging just to survive. Let's talk about fuel first. A German panzer division needed roughly 350 cubic meters of fuel just to travel 100 kilometers. They had a fancy term for this, Verbrauchsschatz, or consumption unit. Back in Russia, they could move across huge distances. Here in Normandy, they couldn't move at all. Allied bombers had absolutely demolished France's rail infrastructure. Every bridge across the Seine River was blown up. Fuel trains got strafed by fighter planes before they could even reach the depots. Eberbach got depressing reports every single day. 12th SS Panzer can't move. 2nd Panzer only has fuel for 15 kilometers. All his brilliant tactical knowledge was worthless because his tanks were turning into stationary bunkers. When a Tiger tank broke down, and trust me, they broke down constantly, because those complex transmissions couldn't handle the massive 60-ton weight, you needed a specialized recovery vehicle called a Bergpanther to haul it back. But guess what? The recovery vehicles had no fuel either. So one breakdown meant losing that tank permanently. The German mechanics were absolute wizards, don't get me wrong. They stripped parts from destroyed tanks' gears, optics, whatever they could salvage, to keep the surviving machines running. They worked through the night under camouflage nets, using flashlights covered with blue filters to avoid attracting those relentless Typhoon fighter bombers. But even genius-level mechanics can't conjure gasoline out of thin air. Eberbach watched his strength just melt away, not from enemy attacks, but from simple attrition. Every kilometer his tanks drove brought them 1 kilometer closer to becoming useless hunks of metal. He was fighting a defensive campaign with resources that were constantly disappearing, assuming his enemy faced the exact same problems. He assumed the Americans also had to conserve every drop of fuel, count every single shell, and worry constantly about replacement parts. He assumed the basic laws of warfare applied equally to everyone. He was dead wrong. While Eberbach carefully rationed every liter of his synthetic fuel, something absolutely mind-blowing was happening on the beaches of Omaha and Utah. it would have crushed Eberbach's soul if he'd seen it. The Americans didn't just land an army, they built an entire functioning city on those beaches. By August, the artificial harbors plus the captured Cherbourg port were processing cargo on a scale that completely rewrote the rules of military history. We're talking 15,000 tons of supplies. Not per month, per day. Let's examine the tank replacement process. In the German military, if your tank got destroyed, you filed paperwork to Berlin, waited weeks for train transport, crossed your fingers that the train wouldn't get bombed, and maybe, just maybe, eventually you'd get a replacement. For the U.S. First Army, it worked like shopping at Walmart. The Americans set up these massive equipment yards right behind the front lines. Picture enormous fields absolutely packed with row after row of brand new M4 Sherman tanks. They pumped 4,800 tanks into the war zone, with thousands more sitting ready in England. When an American tank unit lost a vehicle in the morning combat, the crew, assuming they survived, would often be sitting in a fresh tank, fully fueled and loaded with ammunition by that same evening. There's this documented interrogation of a captured German officer from Panzer Lehr Division. He asked his American captors, "How many tanks do you people have?" The American interrogator just shrugged and replied, "As many as we need." The German officer didn't believe him. He literally couldn't wrap his head around it. To German thinking, a tank was this rare, carefully hand-built war machine. To Americans, a Sherman was basically just a car with a gun bolted on a mass-produced product made on the same assembly lines that cranked out Fords and Chevrolets. This was the Detroit advantage. Germans destroyed tanks one at a time. Americans manufactured them in batches of 50, but having tons of tanks doesn't help if you can't keep them fueled and supplied. And this is where the difference becomes almost laughable. While Eberbach's Tigers were being abandoned because they'd run dry, the Americans created something called the Red Ball Express. Starting in late August to support their breakthrough offensive, the U.S. Army built a dedicated one-way highway loop exclusively for supply trucks. It was like a never-ending conveyor belt made of rubber and steel. Nearly 6,000 trucks, mostly driven by African-American soldiers, running nonstop 24/7. The Red Ball Express delivered 12,500 tons of supplies every single day. They burned massive amounts of fuel just transporting supplies, a level of waste that would have given a German logistics officer a heart attack. But Americans didn't worry about efficiency, they worried about speed. They had so much fuel they could literally afford to waste it. Put yourself in General Eberbach's boots for a moment. He orders a counterattack near Mortain. His panzer regiments roll out, engaging the U.S. 31st Infantry Division. Their landing hits, destroying Shermans, pushing forward successfully. Then their fuel gauges hit empty. The entire attack just stops. Crews have to abandon their tanks and run for their lives. Meanwhile, on the other side of those hedgerows, the American units are swimming in supplies. They're firing entire artillery barrages at individual soldiers just because they can afford to. They're leaving tank engines idling just to power their radio equipment. The American lines had this constant, deep, rumbling sound of thousands of combustion engines running. The German lines, growing quieter and quieter, broken only by the screams of wounded soldiers. This massive mathematical gap started destroying German morale from the inside out. And the numbers paint a picture of complete psychological breakdown. Take the ambush at Le Desert. One Panther tank commander reported engaging an American Sherman column. In just 14 minutes, he knocked out 3 American tanks. A textbook tactical victory, right? But then a 4th Sherman showed up, and a 5th. By day's end, that Panther crew had destroyed 8 enemy tanks total. An incredible 8-to-1 kill ratio, but the next morning, American reinforcements arrived. For every single tank the German destroyed, 10 brand new ones rolled up to replace it. The replacement ratio was literally 10-to-1 against him. He was winning every individual battle while losing the entire war. This infinite respawn reality completely shattered morale. Eberbach saw it in his medical reports. His elite tank crews were surviving on 4 hours of sleep per day. They were popping Pervitin pills, basically methamphetamine, just to keep their eyes open. The Americans, meanwhile, had enough manpower to rotate entire units every 36 hours. A German crew would fight for 11 straight days without any relief whatsoever. An American crew would fight for 3 days, then rotate to a rear area where they got hot meals, clean drinking water, and fresh uniforms. This wasn't just a military gap, it was a civilization-level difference. One captured German prisoner in August was found carrying half a stale bread loaf and 7 bullets. His American captors offered him a chocolate bar from a supply crate containing 10,000 bars. The prisoner completely broke down crying. He realized that while his leaders demanded he die for Germany, the enemy had the industrial power to ship chocolate bars across an entire ocean. The end came for General Eberbach on August 31st. He got captured during a reconnaissance patrol. But honestly, his army had died weeks before that. After the battle ended, Allied investigation teams surveyed all the wreckage in the Falaise pocket. They found hundreds of German armored vehicles, but when they analyzed what actually destroyed them, they discovered something shocking. A huge percentage hadn't been penetrated by any Allied shells. They'd simply been abandoned. Let's look at the specific numbers for Panzergruppe West from August 1st to September 1st. The 1st SS Panzer Division started the month with 67 operational tanks. By September 1st, 0. Not because they all got destroyed in combat, though many did, but because the division just systematically fell apart, tank by tank, not from American gunfire, but from the basic mathematical reality of no fuel supply. The 12th SS Panzer Division began August with 82 tanks. By August 20th, when they got caught in the first phase of the Falaise encirclement, they had 34 working machines. The rest weren't burning wrecks, they were stationary positions, dug into the ground as anti-tank guns because they couldn't actually move anymore. By August 31st, when the pocket completely closed, they had 7 tanks left. 7 total. Every single one immobile, running on fumes, fuel gauges permanently reading empty. The Panzer Lehr Division, once the absolute pride of the Wehrmacht, shows maybe the clearest example of logistical defeat. They entered Normandy in early June with 190 tanks and assault guns. By late June, after just 3 weeks of fighting, they were down to 70 operational machines. By mid-July, 35. By August 15th, when they first deployed to defend the Falaise sector, they had exactly 11 tanks that could still actually move under their own power. The psychological damage to the tank crews is impossible to overstate. Imagine you're a Panzer Lehr tank commander. You survived North Africa, you survived Russia. You survived the D-Day landings, your crew is still intact. Your Tiger tank has never been penetrated by enemy fire, the armor is perfect. The 88mm cannon is still deadly accurate. But you being ordered to walk away from the vehicle because there's no fuel to drive. It's just 15 kilometers to the next defensive position. Across the entire Falaise pocket, this exact scene played out 247 times. 247 German tanks and assault guns were abandoned, not destroyed. The American recovery teams that followed the breakthrough found them still smelling of diesel and hot metal. Engines cold, ammunition loaded. Crews vanished into the night on foot, desperately searching for an escape route that no longer existed. The accounting afterward was incredibly detailed. The U.S. Army created a destroyed equipment list that tracked not just German vehicles killed in action, but exactly how they were lost. Of the 847 German armored vehicles catalogued in the Falaise pocket wreckage, here's the breakdown. Destroyed by direct fire, 234 vehicles, roughly 28%. Destroyed by air attack, 189 vehicles, roughly 22%. Destroyed by engineers and demolition charges, 112 vehicles, roughly 13%. Abandoned without any damage, 312 vehicles, roughly 37%. 312 tanks and assault guns just left behind because they couldn't operate anymore. No shells had pierced their armor. No mines had blown off their tracks. They were defeated by the simple absence of a liquid that existed in unlimited quantities in the American supply network. Meanwhile, the U.S. First Army did their own inventory. They'd lost hundreds of Shermans fighting through those hedgerows. It was absolute carnage for their equipment. The 2nd Armored Division, which took the worst beating fighting through the Norman bocage, reported losing 648 tanks just in August, nearly their entire starting strength. But by September 1st, the operational strength of U.S. armored divisions stood at nearly 100%. Not because the losses were undone, but because they'd been completely replaced. In just the 7 days of the Falaise breakout alone, the U.S. First Army received 612 replacement tanks. 612 tanks, all shipped from England, all arriving with ammunition, fuel, and crews already assigned. The supply pipelines feeding this replacement system stretched back to Normandy's harbors, where Liberty ships were arriving with clockwork precision. Each ship carried not just tanks, but the entire support ecosystem needed to maintain them: engines, transmission parts, ammunition, food, medicine, uniforms, letters from home. A German logistics officer captured near the town of Vere on August 28 was interrogated about German supply plans. He was asked, "How long could your army sustain offensive operations with current supplies?" He paused for a long time, then answered, "We cannot sustain anything. We're starving. We're burning dead horses for fuel because we have zero gasoline. Officers are siphoning gasoline from vehicles that are already broken down, transferring it to vehicles they're praying will run long enough to let them escape. This isn't logistics anymore. This is cannibalism." The interpreter wrote that down. The interrogator then asked the German officer, "Do you know how many tons of supplies the Americans receive daily?" The German officer shook his head no. 15,000 tons. The German officer closed his eyes. He didn't say another word for the entire rest of the interrogation. Those 900 tanks Eberbach counted at the beginning of August, most of them ended up rusting away in French fields, defeated by supply chain mathematics. Not one of them killed by a better tank design. Not one defeated by superior battlefield tactics. They were defeated by pure mathematics, by the simple reality that Germany couldn't produce 15,000 tons of supplies daily, while the United States could and would every single day for as long as the war continued. By September 15th, when the final isolated German positions in Normandy finally surrendered, the Falaise pocket had yielded this inventory to Allied forces: 217 German tanks destroyed or captured, 682 German artillery pieces, 1,847 German trucks and transport vehicles, 4,200 German anti-tank guns, 127,000 German prisoners of war. The material accounting told the story more clearly than any battle report ever could. Of those 217 tanks captured intact, 189 showed absolutely no signs of enemy fire, no penetrations, no burn marks from explosions, no damage from air attacks. They were just left behind, abandoned, empty of fuel, useless. The flow from Detroit never stopped for a second. On the exact day Eberbach was captured, 3 more Liberty ships were unloading in Cherbourg. They carried 47 replacement tanks, 1,200 tons of ammunition, 890,000 gallons of fuel, and 4,000 tons of food. For the American Army, destroying the German forces in the Falaise pocket was a major victory. For Eberbach, it was final proof of a truth he could no longer deny. This war wasn't being fought between armies. It was being fought between economic systems. And his economic system had already lost. The Wehrmacht wasn't destroyed because it lacked courage or fighting spirit. It was destroyed because it tried fighting an industrial war with a craftsman's approach. Consider the final numbers. In August 1944 alone, German industry struggled to build 280 tanks of all types. That same month, the United States produced 2,600 tanks. The ratio was 1-9. This wasn't just a tactical disadvantage. This was an extinction event. Those 900 tanks Eberbach commanded at the start of August, by September 1st, that number became 0. Not lost in dramatic pitched battles, but erased in the accounting ledger. In the end, the most dangerous weapon the Americans brought to Normandy wasn't the atomic bomb, the P-51 Mustang, or even the M4 Sherman tank. It was the spreadsheet. It was the mathematics of industrial production that made every German tactical victory strategically meaningless.